Yes, today let's discuss a paper soon after reading it. We read the paper that evidence for visual temporal order processing below the threshold for conscious perception, written by Chassignolle, Giersch, and Coull. And first of all, we will introduce us. Firstly, me, I'm Ryoichi Watanabe, a PhD student at Kyoto University, Japan, and I'm studying the development of consciousness. And Aniko.
I'm Aniko Kustor. I'm a PhD student at Monash University and working in my first year of my PhD.
I'm Yota Kawashima. I'm a research assistant at ATL in Japan and Monash University.
Okay, now I'll summarize this paper. And in this paper, the authors explains we human, and the authors examine to provide evidence that temporal order processing can occur below the threshold for conscious perception. And in this study, the authors set two conditions of the SOA, the time present, the time between the target cue stimuli and target stimuli. And what the 17 milliseconds is the subconscious condition, and the 66 milliseconds is the supra threshold condition. And next is in this task, the two stimuli presented. One is the cue stimuli, and secondary is the target stimuli. And how human can perceive these two stimuli is the same timing or different timing. And the cue stimuli and timing, the duration between the cue stimuli and the target stimuli is set by the 17 milliseconds or 66 seconds. And also, the participants were measured the time response, reaction time measure, and consciously which target is fastly responded. And the results showed that as we can understand that the 66 millisecond condition is the participant can easily to detect which target is fastly in the 60 milliseconds more than the 70 millisecond condition. And interestingly, that the also in the reaction time condition, the participant cannot see the 17 millisecond condition, but the reaction time is less reaction time in the 17 millisecond condition is less than the control condition. And so it means that we cannot see consciously the 17 millisecond condition for the synchronous time perception, but unconsciously according by the reaction time, we can perceive the time synchrony or time asynchrony. There's too short duration, like the 17 milliseconds. We can react. Yes, this is the result of this study, and please add something if you have.
Well, so my understanding of this paper that so maybe you mentioned, but if the time interval of two events or two stimuli were too short, it's been known that human subject or human participant cannot discriminate the temporal order of the stimuli. But the author asked the question, okay, then, does this mean that the information, temporal information, is just destroyed in that situation? And that's the question the author asked in this paper, I think. Then using their proposed technique, they shows that these short interval temporal information still can affect the reaction time in the consequent task, suggesting that these information still be processed unconsciously in the brain. I think this is just my brief summary of this paper. Aniko, do you want to say something?
No, I think you have summarized the paper quite well. They have done, I think, 2 different experiments to account for certain methodological considerations. But I think both of the experiments have the same results or showed the same results that you already mentioned. So yeah, I think it's a good summary.
Yeah, so maybe can I ask a question about the difference between the 2 experiments? So I didn't or have enough time to get into the detail of the papers. So I'm sure that they mentioned something, the reason why they did the experiment too. And the difference is, if I remember correctly, is just the number of stimulus, right? Stimuli. Or so what I mean is that so after showing some visual cue, they ask participant to detect the shape of shape one, or choose shape 1 out of 3 different types of the marks, circle and plus and X. And that's the experiment 1. And after that, they mentioned something which I did not read, and then says that we should use 2 stimuli instead of 3, and that part I couldn't understand it. So if any of you understood the reasoning behind it, can you remind me or just tell me what's the reason?
I understood it correctly. It was regarding the cue conditions. So they have used the red and green colored cues, and I think in the conditions where both of the colors were presented at the same time, or so in both position, the same colors were presented, so red and green and green. There was one, like a possibility for less response options. And I think this is actually illustrated on figure 1A. And yes, on figure 1A. Well, maybe it's not actually shown there. Regardless, I think basically you may not have the same number of responses. I think that was my understanding, but I might have misunderstood it. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. I think that part is not that critical because they shows the same result in the experiment 1 and experiment 2, and in the end conclude that the temporal information can be consciously processed. So I think that's minor given the results. So that's just my one question regarding this paper itself. So do you have any other question? Ryoichi or Aniko?
Yeah, so related to your question, and also I think also this point is minor in this study, but they also I remember that authors referred in this experiment 1 task, the participant can detect the target by the second Q stimulus only, but they also wanted to participants to respond by the first stimuli, right? So they also manipulate this mention or this claim, so that I can't really understand well, but so they also manipulate the experiment too, and the response stimuli O, I forget. O is excluded, right? So in experiment 2, participants can easily do. Sorry, in experiment 2, participants can conduct the task easily in the experiment 2. So the reaction time was less than the experiment 1, right? It according to it based on it's caused by the target. So last stimulates number or last stimulates decision making cost.
Yeah, I don't know how important that is. I mean, the response time is much shorter in experiment 1. In experiment 2 than experiment 1 because of the number of options. But yeah, I don't know, like, is that your question or what was your question? I think that's, yeah, the difference in the response time reflect just the number of, or the difference in the number of options. I mean, the stimulus.
Sorry, just I'm understanding, and yeah, and I remember the discussion or part the authors wrote.
Oh, okay, I see.
But yeah, and but in together in experiment 1 and in experiment 2, the time, sorry, however, sorry, also the reaction time of the experiment 2 was less than experiment 1. The reaction time was less than the control condition in both experiments. So, so the authors conclude that the reaction, the subliminal condition, in the subliminal condition, participant can react more easier than the control condition.
Okay, so should we go into the discussion, or do you want to ask any further question on experiment or results or anything? If no, maybe we can start the discussion from now on. And yeah, I have one questions, and that is, so in this paper, what the author tried to show is only that the temporal order information can be used or processed unconsciously. So in that sense, by showing the difference in reaction time between the visual cue condition and just control condition is enough. But first I read the introduction. What I expected was that the performance will be higher when the visual cue were presented than the control conditions. But in this paper, they said that the reaction time is faster when the visual cue were presented, but the performance just decreased. So, and also, yeah, in the discussion, they says that this is related to speed trade-off, speed accuracy trade-off or something. Yeah, but this is, just not the question, but kind of comments or my thought, or, this is, the result was a bit different from my expectations. So I don't know, it's a little bit surprising to me. So what do you feel about this? So nothing, or did you find they are talking only on the reaction time, or?
Yeah. Yeah. So, but also I know the objective performance that it's like the objective, the reaction time is objective performance, and this judgment is like the subjective performance. We can think or not. I think if in the context of the backward masking studies, it also happened the subliminal phenomenon is happened, that the participant can discriminate which target or which stimuli is happened. Participant can judgment it, like the threshold, near threshold, but the participant cannot respond. Sorry, participant didn't respond. They saw. It means that participant consciously didn't see it, but they can discriminate which one is appeared. But according to this, the objective measure, the threshold of the objective measure is shorter than the subjective measure. But in this study, the judgment performance is also objective measure, right? So for me, the result was understandable, but a little bit confused or something surprising.
Yeah, I think it's definitely an interesting, like a very interesting idea to measure temporal information or this kind of order information. So in relation to whether it can inform performance and improve reaction times or like improve behavioral measures. In that way, I think it's, yeah, it is kind of like a, yeah, an indirect way to measure this, and that's why it's quite effective or quite striking that the subject or in the control conditions there were clearly issues or people didn't, like their performance was clearly much less or much slower. But yeah, I think it's definitely, yeah, it's always counterintuitive to for me at least, to think about how can something affect your behavior when it is not processed, or when it cannot affect it directly, but then it can somehow affect indirectly. Do you know what I mean? Or does it make sense?
So I think I need to say this, but this is like a completely psychophysics studies, psychophysics experiment. So maybe I made anything important from the background or, kind of prerequisite knowledge. But still, I think this paper is interesting for me, at least, because for the couple of weeks, we have read some, relation between time perception and neural mechanisms. And here, and I think in the discussion part, the authors mentions that maybe this or something neural correlates. We can find some neural correlates of this, unconscious processing of temporal informations. And yeah, and that's definitely something that we need to investigate. But I have another question which I don't think that the author discussed in this paper. That is, so in the introduction and also in the conclusion, they says that there is a threshold of time interval between two stimuli for conscious perception, which is roughly 20 milliseconds or 40 milliseconds. Okay, I understand that. So from there, what I want to, or what I'm interested in is that, okay, then, is there any threshold for unconscious processings? Because we have our brain, or sorry, not only our brain, but also if we are talking about vision, we have, eyes, and it consists of retina and things like that. And then, their behavior should be constrained by their physical substrate, right? From that perspective, I think there should be some threshold, not for unconscious processing as well. So I'm just curious, what is the threshold for unconscious processing? Or do you know any other papers discussing the threshold for unconscious processing, not for conscious processing? Or is it kind of not interesting question?
No. So I was just thinking, but I can't really recall any specific papers on this. But again, I'm not that kind of familiar with this specific question. And I mean, they have cited quite a few papers in the introduction. So clearly there's a quite wide-ranging literature on this. So I don't really want to I want to say something incorrect because of my lack of knowledge. But regardless, I think that was also something I was kind of thinking, or as the next step was something I would be interested in. Whether, so now they compared 17 milliseconds with 66 milliseconds SOA, and I was wondering if, it would be interesting to go even lower and see whether this is like a linear relationship, like, so it would be fun to examine it with multiple time points or SOAs, and see whether it is more of a, either you can use this information and improve your performance, or you are not able to use it at all, or maybe there is some, like, I assume most likely it will be like some kind of mixture or some kind of normal distribution, where if you start to increase the SOA at some point, sometimes you are able to use it and sometimes not. So again, the average response, I don't know how informative is the average, and it would be very interesting to actually look at trial by trial accuracies or reaction times. That would be definitely something interesting to look at.
I think another possibility or future direction of this paper is that using different modality. I think in the introduction they mentioned that the threshold for conscious perception will be, or seems to be, consistent across modalities or something. We definitely can, use this technique for other modalities. So it's, I think, another like a possible future direction. But not sure whether for example, let's say the tone or auditory stimuli. Sorry, never mind, nothing. Just, nothing, Maybe I'll ask later if I can, clarify my thought. But anyway, do you guys have any question or comments?
I mean, yeah, so I was interested in this idea about the temporal system states and this idea about the role of neural oscillations, for example, alpha frequency range oscillations, as a kind of limit for this temporal perception or temporal resolution. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's actually quite interesting. I've never heard of this idea, but I think it's quite, yeah, fascinating. And I mean, I have been working with EEG quite a lot, yeah, relatively, of course, and I was always quite interested in what are these frequencies, like really, what do they do, what do they mean, and considering this option for, you know, some kind of sensory timing or to assess some periodicity within the sensory input. That's a quite interesting idea.
So regarding that, I recently read a paper, which is I think a little bit old, and published in 2003 by Christoph Coull and sorry, I forgot the name of the other guy, but published in Trends in Cognitive Science or something. And the title was, is discrete or continuous or something? I think, which is a famous kind of review paper or kind of summarizing paper. And what they propose that is a different frequency wave encode different information or something like that. And you know, combining these information, we can bind or something, if I remember correctly. But that kind of related to, you know, your oscillation idea. But yeah, that's my just brief comment.
Yeah, I should read that paper. That sounds actually quite interesting. And I mean, I think there are many, like, obviously this is not my idea, but it was in the paper, and then apparently it was proposed by a researcher called Coull in the 70s. So yeah, we are definitely, like, I think this has been around for quite a while.
Yeah, now I found the paper. The first author is Van Rulen, I think, who is working on time perception quite a lot. And the title is perception discrete or conscious continuous? Yeah, I think that's a, I don't know. It cited more than 200 or something times, so should be very good, or you know, the famous paper.
So another idea I think the author raised, and it is quite interesting, is the role of individual variations. So as you guys already mentioned, there was, I think, quite a significant, like maybe 20%, or yeah, because of out of something 50 or something participant, 10 participants, they needed to be excluded because they were actually not fitting into the criteria for doing the control task at 50%, so like chance level, but they were apparently better at it. And yeah, I mean, this is also something related to your task comment, or somewhat related to it. I wonder how much variance can there be between people? I mean, obviously, again, there should be some physiological limit and, you know, some anatomical limit for how much variation can be, especially towards like the upper limit or how good they can be. But nonetheless, yeah, it would be quite interesting to see whether, yeah, what is the range for this variability.
So I think last week we discussed the sleep paper, right? And then there, the different frequency range were associated with different sleep stage. And every time, you know, the frequency range were mentioned in the paper, like alpha, beta, or theta or something, I always forgot the exact value or the range. Every time it varies, right? So that, is it related to the, you know, intersubject differences, or what?
Yeah, I mean, so, okay, so I think on one hand, there are different traditions, and also different researchers have placed these frequency names or categories to different points. But there's also, especially for alpha frequency activity, there seems to be individual variability in the peak alpha activity. So some people may have their like peak power, alpha power, at like 10 hertz. Other people may have at 11 or 12, somewhere around. And yeah, so that's also something that maybe potentially could result in these temporal differences or individual variability if we subscribe to this idea of the, yeah, these frequencies are kind of determining your temporal, like the ability of your temporal perception, or, yeah, or the resolution of it, if that makes sense. But there's something I'm always puzzled with alpha activities, that, so, you know, alpha activity very traditionally is most like so this activity is the largest, or I think the most pronounced, when someone is resting and they close their eyes. And I mean, you know, it might be just something completely unrelated and not important, but I kind of, it is kind of weird if alpha frequency activity kind of determines your temporal perception, and like, yeah, how much you can perceive, or how accurately you can perceive. Why is it? Why does this frequency become so much more pronounced when you close your eyes? But again, it might be a completely stupid question, and it's maybe just, you know, like a completely unrelated thing. Yeah, I'm just puzzled by this.
So, okay. So first of all, I need to say that I do not know a lot about, you know, this difference frequency and its relation with, you know, the behavior or the states of yourself. But if it happens only when close your eyes, then I might, or just, you know, intuitively, I think it's related to some, you know, input from eye. That means, or, okay, if that's the case, then is the same thing happen when we, let's say, do something like this? Like, so that we can't hear anything. instead of, accepting visual input. Or let's say, I don't know whether it's possible or not, but we can somehow use, smart sensation or other modalities. Does it happen, or it's specific to only vision? Or
yeah, that's a very good question. I have no idea. I know it is most commonly associated with closing eyes. I'm not sure if it's actually related to visual input, because again, I don't know this for sure, but I seem to remember that it doesn't necessarily change if you just, for example, stare at a blank screen. Or I guess, or yeah, I'm not quite sure, but I think so. But yeah, that's actually a very interesting question, whether something similar occurs in the other primary sensory cortices.
yeah, Ryoichi, do you wanna ask anything?
Yeah, I'm wondering. Yes, I have a question, same as you, and in this study, the 17 millisecond is subliminal condition, but right about 10 people can see and this judgment it, but they were not matching in for the analysis, so exclusion. But what? So it is not the small number, I think. So the result will be changeable, like and depend on the condition or something little change. And I'm wondering now, and in fact, the threshold for the visual information depend on the visual stimuli, like the low order information, like the direction of the line or something GABA patches stimuli. The threshold is about, I think, less than 50 milliseconds, right? But like the dual task, the stimulus is a number, and the number was higher or less than the 5. In this context, the threshold is about the 50 milliseconds. And the other task, like the color variation and mix the color and number task, red 3 or blue 6 or something, and switch tasking. It means that when the participants were asked to respond to the color, or the other task, the participants were asked to respond to less or more than the 5 condition. The threshold was about 70 to 80 milliseconds. So the threshold of the task of the backward masking is changeable depending on the stimuli. So I think so. I also wonder. I also wondering, and I think it is difficult to find or to decide the limitation of the time or minimum time for the to process in the brain information.
I think your question or comment is more to do with the near threshold experiment itself and not related to this paper, I feel. Because in this paper, the reason why they use, the first experiment, or the, sorry, not the first, I think the second temporal order judgment task is that they want to confirm that the participant did not consciously perceive the, cue, visual cue. As long as they can confirm that, they're just fine. And then on top of that, they want to show that these unaware or unconscious visual cue can change behavior or have some impact or influence on the brain process or something. So I understand your question again is related to the near threshold experimental paradigm itself, and then whether it's okay to use that to refer the conscious percept, or whether sub-participant consciously perceive the stimulus or not. Is it what you want to ask, or Ryuichi? Yeah. So I don't know. Like, as we all know, that it's very difficult to kind of characterize subjective experiences, right, in a quantitative way, or using some objective measures. So we need to accept some kind of limitation, and that implies that it's very dangerous to interpret too much based on limited measurement, I think. But if we says that, oh, this is not like a proper measure, at the same time we need to propose better measure. Otherwise, our claim is just meaningless, and we can't we should keep using the same measurement otherwise. So I don't know, like, do you have any other idea to measure subjective experiences in a much proper way, especially like this temporal information of subjective experiences?
I think we should read some papers on metacognition, because I think there's, if someone has been working on this a lot, then it's the metacognition folks. And yeah, in general, I think it's a quite interesting question whether, for example, this around chance performance on average for these participants were coming from completely randomly pushing the two buttons and not perceiving anything, or they actually 50% of the time were actually seeing and knowing exactly, and then in the other they well then they're yeah, sorry, no, then it wouldn't work, because then the chance level wouldn't go well. So so yeah, sorry, what I'm wondering is, can we say for certain for such experiment that the participants did not see the stimuli, or were not able to assess to do the temporal judgment at any point of the study, or maybe they just they were not good enough, or like, for example, maybe they were able to see it in like 20%, but then in the remaining ones they couldn't, and that kind of, I don't know, destroyed their performance. I don't know. Is that possible? Maybe it's unlikely.
Yeah. I don't know, but like you're kind of saying like varying the the threshold or just the interval in a step by step manner in a fine grained scale, but not sure. What I mean by that is that, let's say if I did let's say if I participate in one experiment in one day, and then I'll get some threshold, near threshold or interval for me, and then if I do the same experiment in, let's say, in other day, I will say that the threshold will be very different from the previous one. Within subject differences will be happen. So it's and also it's very difficult to relate what the factor of the difference, why the difference. So I don't know whether it's very meaningful to fine grade and define find the very like precise exact interval, near threshold interval. But
yeah, no, I see. I think that's no, that's definitely a good point.
But having said that, we should have again our perception or everything basically said to be generated by the brain. So there is some physical considerations. So should be there some range of near threshold interval, and that information is very important to infer what's happening in the brain. So let's again, if you want to relate that information with frequency or something, it's very important to see how difference or how different they are. But maybe we can do some systematic experiment to see the variance of near threshold interval. But again, my background is not psychology, so I do not know a lot about it. So I first think that when they measure the around chance interval for the first time, I feel like they measured it in a systematic way. So the way as Aniko suggested, so just change 1 millisecond, 1 millisecond, 1 millisecond, or can be like 10 milliseconds or something. But so my question is how the first researchers introduced this concept for the first time. Do you know this?
You mean specifically for this time or order perception?
Not only to this, I mean, not specific to this, but more generally, when someone says that this is the near threshold something, did they do the experiment or vary the condition in a systematic way, in a fine?
Yeah. So I think it this staircase method of finding how can people what is the threshold. I think that has been around for quite a while, and there are a lot of old studies and these classical laws supporting it or showing different aspects of it. Yeah.
I think so. But yeah, just like the start of the psychophysics way to how to detect or how to detect the two stimulus is different or not. But I think that Weber or Pfeffer or Weber or something psychophysics experiment. So I think for the perceptual threshold or the similar or different judgment, I think there are some way to explain it, right? Into this one, it's or something the random way, or it's a stepwise way, or stepwise and downwise way, or something. So there are some way to examine the threshold or the discrimination point, discriminative, no, sorry, when participant can discriminate point.
I see. Yeah, thanks. Okay, then. Do you have any other question? I think we've already discussed for roughly 1 hour. And Aniko, you might
Also,
need.
maybe,
Yeah.
yeah, maybe I have one short question. And yeah, it just depending on if you have any ideas about. So do you think these like the ability that we can process things subconsciously, apparently, or based on this paper, so for example, the order of certain stimuli, does this mean that you know, there are perhaps different temporal like different temporal resolution of different processes in the brain? And yeah, so do you think this paper suggests, or would you agree that it may be a wrong assumption to think that the brain and human consciousness has one single temporal, like ideal temporal resolution or an ideal temporal scale?
If you're talking about only like subjective conscious experiences, like from phenomenological perspective, we do not have, many different time scale of subjective experiences at one time. So let's say in one day, my, time scale of consciousness will be like 10 millisecond, or sorry, that should be too short, but like, let's say X millisecond, and another day, not X, rather Y or something. That can be happen, I would say. But, it depends on, like, if you're talking about unconscious processing, then yeah, it should be like different time scale in different regions and also different modalities. But not sure whether we have, different time scale for conscious or subjective experiences. But again, recently I read a paper saying that hierarchical structure of time scale of subjective experiences or something. So I don't know, maybe I have very complicated nested structure of time experience, the time scale of subjective conscious experiences.
Yeah, I think, yes, I agree. And it is possible that the time or when pathway in the brain, something like the where pathway or how to pathway, and also the when pathway. And I think the time information is, I don't know, but the time information is related to the space information, or not like that. Like the, sorry, I forget the word, but so the time and the space information is more core information or core experience or core consciousness than the other perceptive information, right? I don't know, but I think it is possible, this story. So I think yes, time scale consciousness or time scale process is in the brain in the brain, I think.
Yeah, that kind of, I mean, it makes sense to have maybe multiple pathways and yeah, how can they interact with each other? I don't know, but yeah, it's definitely for future research to find out.
Okay, so any other question, Giersch?
Nothing good.
Okay, then we can finish today's discussion now. See you next week.